On the edge of the vast whispering forest, where the trees stretched tall as mountains, and the winds carried the echoes of ancient songs, there stood a small forgotten village named Elderglow. In this quiet place, where the world seemed to move slower and the stars shone brighter, there was one man who was the lifeblood of the village, the lantern keeper. The lantern keeper's name was Olwen, an old man with a long grizzled beard and eyes that shone with the wisdom of years. He was known by every villager, and his nightly task was one of deep importance. For as long as anyone could remember, Olwen had lit the ancient lanterns that lined the village's winding roads, ensuring that no darkness ever swallowed Elderglow. These lanterns were no ordinary lamps. They were imbued with magic, passed down from generation to generation, and as long as they burned, the village remained safe from the unseen terrors lurking within the whispering forest. It was said that the lanterns kept the shadows, mysterious, dark creatures, at bay. No one knew exactly what the shadows were, only that long ago, when the lanterns had flickered out during a storm, several villagers had gone missing, never to be seen again. Since that night, Olwen's family had been the guardians of the lanterns, lighting them without fail, every evening as dusk fell. But Olwen's time was nearing its end. He had no children, no apprentice to carry on the tradition. The villagers worried, but no one had dared to ask him what would happen when he could no longer tend to the lanterns. It was a question everyone feared the answer to. Among the villagers was a young woman named Era. She was unlike the others. While most stayed close to the village, avoiding the forest and the old superstitions that surrounded it, Era was adventurous. She spent her days exploring the edges of the whispering forest, gathering herbs and flowers, sometimes even venturing into the dark thickets where few dared to go. Her curiosity was boundless, and her heart was strong. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon and the shadows began to stretch across the land, Era saw Olwen struggling to light one of the larger lanterns near the village square. His hands shook, and he nearly dropped the flame. Without thinking, she rushed to his side. "Let me help you, Olwen," Era said, taking the lantern's handle from his frail hands. Olwen gave her a weary smile, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Thank you, child. But this is my duty. It has been for many years." "I know," Era said softly, lighting the lantern with the small flame Olwen carried. "But you don't have to do it alone." Olwen hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps not tonight." As they lit the remaining lanterns together, Era couldn't help but ask the question that had been on everyone's mind. "What will happen when you can no longer light the lanterns?" Olwen's face grew dark, and for a moment, Era thought he wouldn't answer. But finally, he spoke. "The lanterns are ancient, as old as the village itself. They were lit for the first time by my ancestors, using magic that has long since faded from this world. Without them, the shadows will come again." "But can't someone else learn to light them?" Era pressed. "There must be a way." Olwen shook his head. "It's not just the lighting. The flame must be passed on. Only one who knows the secret of the lantern's heart can keep them burning." "The lantern's heart?" Era echoed, confused. "What is that?" Olwen sighed and motioned for her to follow him. They walked to his cottage, a small stone building at the edge of the village. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke and old books, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with trinkets, scrolls, and dusty tomes. In the center of the room, on a worn wooden table, sat a small ornate chest. Olwen opened the chest with trembling hands, revealing a glowing crystal about the size of an apple. It pulsed with a warm golden light, and Era could feel its power radiating from it. "This," Olwen said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is the lantern's heart. It is the source of the magic that keeps the lanterns burning. Without it, the flames would die and the shadows would rise again." Era stared at the crystal, mesmerized. "How does it work?" "The heart is alive," Olwen explained. "It needs a keeper, someone to feed it with their own strength, their own life force. That is why my family has always been its guardian. But..." He trailed off, looking at Era with a mix of hope and sorrow. "I have no one to pass it to. When I am gone, the heart will dim, and the lanterns will fail." Era felt a surge of determination. "Then teach me. I'll take up the duty. I'll become the next lantern keeper." Olwen looked at her, his eyes filled with surprise. "You would give up your freedom for this?" Era hesitated. She had always dreamed of exploring the world beyond Elderglow, of seeing the cities and distant lands she had only heard about in stories. But as she stood there, in Olwen's small cottage, looking at the lantern's heart, she realized something. The village, the people she loved, they were worth protecting. If the shadows returned, there would be no adventures, no future. She couldn't abandon them. "I will," she said firmly. "I will be the lantern keeper." Olwen smiled, a bittersweet expression. "Very well, child. But know this. The heart demands more than just time. It demands sacrifice. You will age faster than others, your life slowly draining as you tend to the lanterns. It is a heavy price." Era nodded, her heart steady. "I understand." Over the next few weeks, Olwen taught Era everything he knew. She learned how to tend to the lanterns, how to use the heart to fuel the flames, and most importantly, how to protect the village from the shadows. Each night, she and Olwen would walk the village streets, lighting the lanterns together, the glow from the flames casting long shadows on the cobblestone paths. But as the nights passed, Olwen grew weaker. His steps became slower, his voice softer. It was clear that his time was running out. One evening, after they had finished lighting the last lantern, Olwen turned to Era. "It's time," he said, handing her the small flame he had carried for so many years. Era took it, her hands steady, but her heart heavy. "You've done so much for the village, Olwen. I'll make sure your work continues." Olwen smiled, his eyes twinkling with pride. "I know you will, child. You have the heart of a true keeper." That night, Olwen passed away in his sleep, and the village mourned the loss of their lantern keeper. But as the days went on, Era took up the mantle, lighting the lanterns each evening as dusk fell, just as Olwen had taught her. The villagers soon came to trust her as they had trusted him, and the lights of Elderglow continued to burn bright. But there were whispers that Era had changed. She no longer smiled as she once did, and her once bright eyes seemed dimmer, older. The weight of the lantern's heart was heavy, and as the years passed, she began to feel its toll. But Era never wavered. She had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. One cold winter's night, many years after she had taken up the mantle, Era stood alone in the village square, lighting the final lantern. The wind howled through the streets, carrying with it the faintest sound of whispers, whispers from the whispering forest. Era paused, her heart quickening. The shadows had been quiet for so long, but now, as she stood there with the lantern burning brightly beside her, she could feel them stirring. Something was coming, but Era was ready. She had spent her life preparing for this moment, and though she was older now, her body worn and tired from the years of keeping the lanterns lit, her spirit was unbroken. With the lantern's heart glowing softly in her hand, Era stepped toward the edge of the village, where the forest loomed dark and silent. The shadows would come, but they would not find Elderglow unprotected. Not while Era still drew breath.